In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to make 2 different designs from one cutter. Welcome back to another tutorial. This is Stephanie from Little Cookie Co.
Out jumps good old Santa Claus, down through the chimney with lots of toys, all for the little ones' Christmas joys. Ho, 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 who wouldn't go? Ho, 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 who wouldn't go?
Okay, so what we'll need is a sharp pair of scissors, an edible marker, and our scribe. And we'll also need 2 cookies. They're the same shape and our icing colors. So we're going to use the same shape for both cookies. So we have the gingerbread man cutter that I used for that. And then we're going to flip it upside down and make our Rudolph out of that. So we're going to start with our Rudolph cookie. I've got my outline consistency and I'm going to trace or outline the top of his head. So just an oval shape here, and then I'm going to follow the bottom of the cookie for where it's going to be his nose and his mouth. Once I'm done this, I'm going to go and outline his ears. So with his ears, we're going to make the top part and the bottom part, which is going to be a different color to make it look like the inside of his ear. So again, the same consistency, that my outline consistency, and about halfway, a little bit more than halfway down, I'm going to put a line across the middle, and that will be the top outside part of his ear, and the bottom part will be the inside of his ear, which will be a different color. I'm going to put this outline to dry for a few minutes, and we'll come back and flood it. Okay, now that my icing outline is dry, I'm going to go in and do the bottom of the ears. So here I have a thicker consistency. It's almost like my outline consistency. And the reason being is I don't want this area to crater, which happens when it's a really small area. And so I don't want to use it too loose of a flood. So I'm using a thicker icing so that it prevents that cratering. And it's easier to smooth out because it's such a small area. If you're having a tough time smoothing it out because it's thicker, just add a little bit more icing. The more icing you have in that area, the easier it is to smooth out. So you can see I added a little bit of more icing because it wasn't quite getting smooth. And now it's smoothing out nicer. And we'll go ahead and do the other side as well. And we won't do the top of the ear yet. Even though I have a line between the 2 areas, I don't want to do the top of the ear because I don't want the icing to touch and come together. I want to make sure there's a separation between that top part of the ear and the bottom. So we're going to move on to the middle of the head after, and then come back at the end to do the top of the ears. That way all the sections stay separate. So you'll notice sometimes, we do certain sections first and then move on to other sections and then come back and finish it. That's to create that separation in the icing, to give you, a sort of dent or divot between the sections, instead of having all the icing sort of touch together and then it becomes one smooth, instead of having creases, you have like a smooth icing. So I'm going to go ahead and flood my reindeer head here. And again, I always go slow around my edges. I had a lot of people comment on my other videos asking, do I slow down when I'm doing my tutorials? And I don't. This is my actual speed here. This is how I pipe. And if you're piping way faster than this and you're having a hard time keeping control of your icing and your designs, it probably means you need to slow down. Cookies do take a lot of time and patience. Most of us, even that have been doing this for years and have decorated thousands of cookies, we still go at this speed. It's just necessary to, have control over your icing and your bag. So I've let the brown part crust over. I'm going to go ahead and do his eyes. Now again, this is a thicker icing, an outline consistency, because it's such a small area. We don't need a big puddle of flood icing. We just need a little bit of thicker icing to make the eyes. And then I go ahead right away and I put my black icing in there. And again, it's a thicker icing, my outline consistency. And if you need to smooth it, you have a little peak or something, sticking up because the way you piped it, you can just smooth it out with your scribe. Here I'm just using my scribe, and I took a little white icing off the tip of my bag and I'm just adding it into the black part of the eye. It just gives that extra depth to make the eyes look a little less creepy. Now we're gonna go ahead and do his nose. And here I'm just gonna do a rough outline of my circle. And then I'm not really good at piping perfect circles. So what I like to do with my thick icing is pipe a rough circle so I know the general shape. And then when I go in and fill it, I can make the circle a little bit bigger or make it more even on the sides. If I do an outline and I don't do a really nice circle for my outline and I go to pipe it after, then it'll stay crooked. This way it's a little bit more flexible. So if my circle isn't nice and round or it's uneven, I could fix it by pushing out the icing like you can see here with my scribe. That way it comes out nice and round. And again, I want to pipe this when the base is crusted over, but not fully dry. That way we won't have any cratering issues. So now while this section is done, we're going to move on to the antlers. So here I just have an outline consistency. You want it to be stiff enough that it holds its shape. We don't want, if you use flood or something that's too loose here, you won't get that crisp shape of the antlers. You can really do whichever design you like. This is kind of a popular design that came out a few years ago or maybe longer, and I think it's really cute. So I'm just kind of sticking with it. And again, anytime you have a peak or something that's left from the tip of your bag when you stop piping, you can always go in with your scribe and smooth it out. If you do not have a scribe, you can always use a toothpick. You don't necessarily need a scribe, just something sharp to be able to wiggle that icing smooth. So once we're done this, we're going to go back to the ears. Now that everything sort of has crusted over a little bit, we know that the separation of the icing will stay because it's crusted over enough. And when I say crusted over, it just means that the top layer is basically dried, but underneath the icing is still wet. So here I'm going to take my outline consistency and I'm going to just do a squiggly line. The reason being is that it's a small area and I'm going to use my flood on top of this so it comes out nice and smooth. But because of the small area, sometimes your icing will fall in on itself and crater. So that squiggly line of thick icing prevents that from happening. And I don't wait for it to dry or anything. As soon as I pipe my, the thicker icing there on top, I'll flood right away. And you just have to smooth it out and it'll support that icing and prevent those craters or holes from happening. And then once everything's smoothed out, you can put this next to a fan if you have one, or in a dehydrator, or just leave it on the air dry on the counter. And we'll come back and once it's dry enough, we'll come back with our edible marker to do some more details on him. Just going to add a little bit of hair as well here, just a couple of strands, because I think it looks pretty cute. This is just my take again. It's a popular design. If you want to change it up a little or give him some bangs or something, go for it. It's really, you don't have to do it this way, but it's just an example of how to do it. So I've set my cookie aside in my dehydrator for a while. It's dry enough for me to use my marker. And here I'm just adding some eyebrows and a smile. If you don't have an edible marker, you can always use your black icing for this part. So now we're on to our gingerbread man. So you can see it's facing the right way now. This is the exact same cookie shape we used before. And I'm going to do the same thing as I always do and outline my cookie with outline consistency. And outline consistency just basically means that it's thicker icing. So you can see when I pipe it, it holds that shape of the piped line. And reason being, when we go to flood, we want that flood to be held on to the cookie and not drip off the side. Okay, so now when we're finished our outline, I'm gonna let it dry for a few seconds, or a few minutes actually, and then we're gonna go ahead and flood it. I just wanna say that some people don't like to dry their outline, totally fine, they go right in and flood it. I personally do like to dry it for a few minutes. Reason being, when the icing is still wet and I go into flood, my outline tends to stick to the flood. And then sometimes what happens is it pulls it away from the edge of the cookie and you lose that shape. I find when it's dry, it stays in place and I can go and flood over it or really close to it without breaking the outline or having it, come out of shape. So that's the reason that I put it aside to dry. Usually when you're doing multiple cookies, I'll outline everything. And then while I'm outlining, the first few are drying, and then I just come back and flood. So here again, I'm going really slow around the edges. I have a smaller hole in my bag. You can see I'm not putting too much pressure. The amount of icing coming out of my bag is not a lot. And if you can see my finger here, this is my left finger that I have against the bag. I'm holding my bag with my right hand, and I like to put my finger against the bag. It helps me control where my piping bag is going. It's really hard to pipe one-handed when you're trying to do very, specific areas. And so when you have your finger or your, hand against the bag and you sort of pipe two-handed, it helps you keep control of where your icing is falling. When I'm flooding, I don't have to be as careful because I'm just, filling in the cookie. But when I'm at the edge of the cookie, I do want to, have as much control over my bag as possible. Okay, so I had my cookie aside and now it's crusted over. It's dried enough for me to do the details. So here I've got my outline consistency in black, and I'm just gonna pipe the eyes and the mouth. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing really small details like this, you can always use your edible marker like we did on the Rudolph. Here I'm just showing you that either way, it looks great, whether you use a piping bag or you use an edible marker. I'm just going really slow for the mouth because I do want to have control over where it falls. And so you can see I'm taking my time to make that smile nice and round. Now we're going to go ahead and add the white squiggly lines for the icing on his head, arms, and legs. So here I just touch down and I keep my bag as close to the cookie but not quite touching it, and go up and down to get those squiggly lines. The reason I keep my bag so close to the cookie here is to keep control and to be able to move it and have the icing follow. If I lift it up too high, it's a small area, and by the time I touch down again, I'll be way off the cookie. So just remember, when you're making lots of movement, you do want to keep the tip really close to the cookie. Now just gonna add some red to his cheeks here on top of his smile, just to make it a little more festive. And we're gonna add some green buttons down his middle. And that's it, you've got your gingerbread man. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You can see that it's just one simple cutter that most people have, and you can make two completely different cookies out of it. As always, thank you so much for watching and all your amazing comments. I love hearing the feedback, and if you guys have any questions, let me know below. I try my best to answer them as much as possible, and happy baking!